Today is September 23rd, 2020. My name is Helen Fu, and today I will be interviewing Pastor Jason Tarn from Houston Chinese Church on behalf of the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice University. Thank you so much for joining us today again. And let's start with your childhood. So, where were you born?
I was actually born here, Houston, Texas. Born actually close to the. I was actually born at the women's hospital, so very close to the campus. And I grew up in the Fondren Southwest area, and then eventually in Meyerland. So that's again, this whole area going to the Rice campus was part of my childhood. I remember doing Chinese school. Actually, there was a Chinese school that held classes on the Rice campus on Saturday mornings. That was my first exposure to the campus. And then, those summer enrichment courses. I don't know if you guys still offer that for high schoolers. But yeah, I grew up here in Houston. My parents were here. They came to Houston because of the oil and gas industry. Both of them were working in oil and gas, just kind of in this area. I grew up at, for high school, went to Bel Air High School. So again, close by.
Yeah.
That's kind of, this whole area is kind of my stomping ground.
Yeah. Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I do. Older brother, 3 years older than me, currently living in Oakland, California. So he's there with his wife, 2 kids. So I have a nephew and a niece. And so, yeah, just one brother. And for myself, I have a wife, been married 15 years, and we have a 9-year-old daughter, who's in 4th grade right now. And we are actually expecting our second child, a daughter, at the end of this year. Did you know that? I don't know if you heard.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a huge surprise for us,
Yeah.
but an answer to prayer.
Yeah.
We have been long desiring to expand our family. And so in of 2020, of all years, with everything crazy going on, the Lord provided for us a child who should be here by the end of the year, scheduled for end of December. So another daughter, we found out, so pretty excited about that.
Oh my gosh! Wow! Congratulations!
No,
Didn't know
thanks.
that. Wow.
Yeah, appreciate it.
So was your brother also born in Houston?
He was born in San Antonio.
Okay.
I think my parents came here for graduate school. They came from Taiwan, so that's where they grew up. Both of them born in mainland China, born during the war, during World War II. Both sets of grandparents were either working for or connected with the Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist party, and so they had to flee. So both my parents, tell the story of when they were small children. They with their families fled to Taiwan, and so they were born in China, but their upbringing, their childhood would all be in Taiwan, in Taipei. They both went to Taida, the university there in Taipei, and then for undergrad and for graduate school, they separately. I mean, they didn't know each other back then, but they met when they were in Bowling Green, in Ohio. So that's where they first came to the States, and eventually did their graduate studies. Met, got married, both in oil and gas. Eventually going to San Antonio first, and then Houston. And so my brother was born there. They only lived there for a few years. Then they settled in Houston, and that's where I was born.
Okay.
So and I was born in '79. So that was still during a time where I think right before, I think there was kind of a big there's a downturn in terms of the economy for oil and gas. But they came in and they were settled in, and fortunately they were able to still stay stable during that time. So that's
okay.
my childhood.
So they both went to the same school in Taipei. Didn't know each
Yes, but they
other.
didn't know each other. I think they're a few years apart.
Wow.
But
Okay,
then
okay.
they met when they were in Bowling Green,
Wow.
and then my dad did another degree in Virginia at the University of Virginia, and then eventually, I think his first job after that was in San Antonio, and
Okay,
then here in
I see.
Houston. Yeah.
Do you know why they wanted to go to undergrad and grad school in America?
Yeah, well, for grad school, yeah. So undergrad was all in Taiwan,
Oh,
but
right.
for the grad school, yeah, I think it was just for them, further opportunities. It was my Yeah. So both of them, they had an older sibling who already did something similar.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So both of them are not the oldest in their family, and they both had a sibling already here, and that was, I think, what helped them to be able to come here as well. And so yeah, they each had a sibling that kind of felt things out, kind of
Right.
really made it an attractive option for them, and so they were fortunate enough to be able to get in. And this was all after 65, where they're allowing more immigrants from East Asia to
Mhm.
come for further education. And so yeah, so they were fortunate enough to do that. And then yeah, and then they met, and
Awesome.
married in Ohio, I believe. Yeah, married in Ohio, and then eventually um, uh, became Texans, and they've just kind of been settled here in
Wow.
Texas
Okay.
since the late 70s. Yeah.
Cool. So how would you describe like the neighborhood that you grew up in? I know you
Yeah.
said you grew up in like Fondren area and then Maryland.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I grew up basically, yeah, so Fondren and Braeswood, around that area, actually closer to West Belfort.
Okay.
So so I guess the closest like elementary school would probably be Fondren. I
Okay.
don't know, no, that's the middle school. There's like Welch Middle School and Fondren Middle School. Anyways, so those are kind of the schools I can remember. But anyway, that area, yeah, I was there all the way until I was we lived there until I was in fifth grade.
Okay.
That area, um, I think the reason we eventually moved was there, yeah, eventually our like, I think the overall, um, there's, Houston, not much zoning, right? So
Mhm.
in terms of just different areas developing differently. So at first it was just these suburban neighborhoods, and then it became more commercialized, and then a lot of apartment complexes being built up, and so it got to a point where I think our home got broken into maybe
Oh.
three times, and by the third time, my dad was like, "All right, we should let's move to another area,"
Yeah.
and we eventually moved to the Maryland area. I was actually I never actually went to the public elementary school. I actually went to St. Thomas Episcopal,
Okay.
which is close there, close
Right.
to Maryland. Yeah, so I went there actually for elementary school. And so that was kind of, I never really experienced the neighborhood um, community in that sense. I mean, I was always just commuting straight to that private school.
Right.
My brother did go to Welch Middle School, so he had a better feel of kind of the community in that sense. But for
Hmm.
me, it was by the time we moved to Maryland, I was still at St. Thomas,
Hmm.
and I didn't start going to the public school system until middle school. And that was kind of my first exposure to getting a more accurate feel of the neighborhood and
Right.
community.
Right.
So yeah, so that wouldn't be for me until sixth grade, and I went to Johnston Middle School, which is now
Oh, wait, I did
called.
too.
Oh, you did? Oh,
Yeah.
really? Did you go to Bel Air as well?
No, I went to Carnegie, but my brother
Oh,
goes to Bel
Carnegie. Oh,
Air.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, was it
Wow.
still called Johnston, or did they change it to
Yeah. Well,
Maryland?
in my year, it was Johnston. I think like a year or two after I left, they changed it to Maryland.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean that's right, because yeah, I mean you guys live. I mean, because your mom was teaching that over
Yeah.
at Coulter, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Wait, what? Were you there for the arts too, or?
Yeah, I was in symphony band.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, so I was playing the percussion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was there for dance and piano.
nice.
It was an interesting middle school experience at
Yeah,
Johnston,
yeah.
definitely. Oh wow, okay, awesome. So I guess after you moved to Maryland, did you have more like neighborhood friends since you did enter
Yes.
public school?
Yeah, yeah. So definitely there was my first real like, yeah, I mean, it was a good experience for me in terms of well, okay, so I went to a elementary school that's a small private school. So, I
Mhm,
mean,
right.
so St. Thomas. Actually, you probably know some people that went to St. Thomas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I was probably one of the only minorities,
Mhm,
in
right,
my
right.
actual like class. Um, yeah, if there was a minority group, it would probably be Asians.
Yeah,
'Cause, yeah, it's probably Asians and then Caucasians. Probably like
right.
really, if I think about the yearbook, that's pretty much what you would see. And
Yeah.
so me and maybe like two others, and one of them was my cousin, in my grade were the only minorities and we were the
Mhm,
Asians. So most of my friends were, Caucasian. I didn't have that, and I wasn't going to church yet. So I wasn't going to HCC at that time. I can tell that
mhm,
story in a little bit. So it was actually when I went to Johnston, that was the first experience for me to make some friends with other Asian Americans,
mhm,
and also just a good mix of friends there. So yeah,
right.
I did appreciate that, and a number of them were in the neighborhood. So yeah, we'd had fun. I mean, I think it was a time where I guess generationally, my parents were, they're the generation like very different than even me right now. Where I'm a lot more protecting me, and my wife are a
Yeah,
lot more protective
yeah.
of our daughter. Where like they would just let me go. So I would ride my bike to school every day,
Uh-huh.
and after school we're just out and about riding around
Oh, wow.
and just have around with other neighborhood kids. Godwin Park was my like
Oh, I
that
remember
was my
going
hangout.
there.
We'd always be playing around there. So yeah, but yeah, so definitely that was a first experience to really feel
Mhm,
out living in a little neighborhood kind of a thing
right.
where yeah, Johnston was more of that experience. Actually, when I went to Bel Air, then I think I fell more into that Asian bubble at Bel Air because you can, right? There's so
Yeah.
many
No.
other Asian students that I kind of now looking back, I kind of regret the fact that because it was probably because it was just so easy. I just
Mhm,
like slipped right into that Asian
right.
American bubble where I didn't really, um, yeah, I didn't really expand out of that anymore. And that kind of looking back, I'm like, yeah, I do look back fondly at my time in middle school where I felt
Mhm.
like there was a wider experience for me in terms of my circle of friends.
Yeah, that's true. And how was that like transition going from predominantly Caucasian elementary school, private elementary school to that
Yeah,
diverse
yeah.
population?
So I think yeah, I was actually okay.
Mhm.
I mean, it was probably just being in a public school setting, which is a
Right.
little different, where like you're not just in this little small class where you know everyone,
Yeah, yeah.
and then there's like you having to like so it's a much larger body of students, and then you have to actually like move around, versus
Mhm,
private school. You
mhm,
just stay in
mhm.
a classroom, everyone comes to you, and
Right.
and then also just the experience of like there's in middle at Johnston and at Bel Air, there's like the honors track, and then there's the other, the regular track, and I
Mhm.
think that kind of or like there wasn't that kind of demarcation, in a small private school,
Right.
right? Everyone's
Right.
on the
Yeah.
same level, but now you're like, and then for me, if I was in the honor track, I mean, I'm feeling a sense of pride in that. And I'm only hanging out with these people, and then I don't really know all the regular students, and so
Yeah.
all of that's a dynamic that was new to transition into. Which I
Mhm.
mean, some of that's good in terms of challenging your education, but also some of that's bad in terms of creating more
Yeah. Yeah.
classism within these schools. I mean,
Yeah.
and I know I fell into that in terms of that mentality.
Mhm,
Right.
right. And did you ever experience any like discrimination as a minority at St. Thomas
Yeah.
or in public school?
Not at St. Thomas. I
Mhm,
experienced it more starting at Johnston. Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do remember vividly times of being picked on
Mhm,
by other students. Not always majority culture students, not always Caucasians. It could be other minority groups
mhm,
being picked on, but and then also I remember vividly I had a friend who was himself an immigrant. So his parents came to the states you know, not that long ago, at that point. So he still had an accent, right? So his English wasn't as proficient as mine, and also his name, his first name was, you know, was still just transliteration of his Chinese name.
Right, right.
And so I remember him being picked on, um, and me trying to like defend him as well, and then me just getting, and then it came on to me as well. And yeah, I mean, yeah, so definitely those were experiences where, yeah, I remember just feeling a righteous anger where he's being, you know, he got it even worse because of his
Right,
name
right.
and of his accent, so that at least I could like, you know, hang in terms of the, you know, conversation.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, but then at the same time, even without that, even on my own, just, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, always ask, you know, always being asked like, you know, oh, so you know, you must know kung fu, and you know, oh, like,
Right.
so are you, you know, hey Bruce Lee, you know, I mean, they would always call, you know, I think that was like the default, calling you
Yeah,
Bruce Lee.
yeah.
I don't know about girls' experience, but guys are always like, yeah, yeah, that's your nickname, you're Bruce Lee,
Right.
and there's a lot of just assumptions in that way. So yeah, I definitely do recall
Mhm.
that. I think at Bel Air, it was there, but because there were so many Asians, so
Yeah,
many, and because we just kind of stuck to ourselves,
right.
I was, you know, there was just a lot of segregation. You know, I mean, the Bel
Yeah,
Air
yeah, yeah.
cafeteria. I mean, everyone is just like segregated into your own, and
Yeah.
so I didn't feel it as much, probably because I was able to escape in that bubble. Yeah,
Mhm. Right. I think even
but
still
yeah.
now, and yeah, I think even
Oh,
still
there
now,
now.
Bel-Air is very kind of segregated. Like with my
Mm,
brother, all his friends are Asians.
yeah,
Even his like, there's like two of his friends who are mixed, which is like a little more diversity, but not that much. They're still mixed
yeah.
Chinese. Yeah, interesting. And how has his like experiences impacted you, especially at such a young age?
Yeah. So I think definitely like a second generation kind of Asian American experience. I went through that, you know, time of identity struggle, wanting to be white. I mean, definitely, I think it's a common experience of like knowing that all that I, especially, you know, growing up where most of my classmates were all white.
Mhm.
It's not that that I didn't realize I was Chinese American, but definitely, you know, so it wasn't like I didn't realize there's differences. You know, I clearly realized, especially when at St. Thomas. I don't know if you ever aware, like there's Scottish dancing, right? Did you
Yeah,
know that we had to do that? And so like
right.
there was always this performance every year that the students would have to do a performance.
I remember.
And I remember it's always a boy and girl paired up,
Mhm.
and pretty much every year it's me and my cousin. She's you know in the same grade, and she's one of the, you know, few Asian girls on the other class, and I always was paired up. I was never, and then if it wasn't her, it was this other
Right.
Asian girl. I was never paired up with a Caucasian girl. It was always me, either my cousin or that other girl.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, now I didn't really think much of it, but now I'm looking back, I'm like, man, yeah, that's true. Like I mean, all those years I was there, you know, it was
Right.
always consistent, like just pair up the Asian kids. So
Mhm.
even little things like that, obviously. So it wasn't as if like I at that time, I didn't really think about that. I wasn't at all resentful of that at all. But those are things that I still remember,
Mhm.
and
Right.
I think those are little subtle things where, yeah, I definitely had that experience of not wanting to stand out and wanting to be more white, like most people
Right.
that I, you know, had around me. So that was probably still more of a elementary, middle school struggle. I think by the time I got to Bel Air, and that was the same time I was getting more involved at HCC, then
Mhm.
I become more like comfortable being Chinese American,
Mhm.
and I was able to find those friend groups that were predominantly
Right.
Chinese American, and so that kind of helped me just to be more comfortable with who I am.
Mhm.
So yeah, actually started going to church at HEC and going to Bel Air was pretty much around the same time. Like I started going to church like towards the end of middle school.
I
but
see.
really getting involved was like high school.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it was then I started becoming more comfortable with
Right.
who I was as a Chinese American. Um, but prior to that, it's I mean, I went to Chinese school, like I shared earlier. I did do kung fu classes. Part of the Chinese school. I went to what is it called? Evergreen in English. I forget the Chinese name for it, but it used to meet at Rice, and then it's meet. I don't know if it still is, but it used to meet at Strake Jesuit over by Chinatown.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was that Chinese school that I was a part of, and so I did Chinese school, I did kung fu classes, all that so all those typical like cultural things,
Yeah. Right.
and then my parents were involved with the community center, the Taodao Dongxing, I think
Mhm.
that's the name of it. Yeah, so I remember we would do things, there sometimes, and
Right.
for festivals, before we got more involved in church, that would be the kind of thing. If
I
we did
see.
any kind of Chinese celebrations for holidays, it would be
Mhm.
kind of with that community center. Some of my parents' friends and the connections they have there.
Yeah. And so kind of speaking on that, like what was like inside your home like? What was the family structures, any
Yeah.
traditions, culture?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, culturally, going to be very similar to a lot of Chinese American homes.
Mhm.
Um, Both parents worked, so it was a double income home. So my mom was working full time.
Mhm.
Grandparents, paternal grandparents were there,
Okay.
so that when I came home from school, through a carpool system with other parents, there was at least, if it wasn't my mom doing the carpool, but I don't know how she arranged that back then, but then it was my grandparents waiting for me, when I got home. So grandparents, they didn't never lived with us, but they were here in Houston,
Okay.
and so they were involved in my upbringing as well, kind of being like, the sitters
Right.
before my
Right. Right. Right.
parents finally got home. And then my dad would always, they would either eat with us, or my dad would just drive them home,
Mhm.
and then come back, and then we have family time. So parents, stable kind of childhood in that sense. Parents were always together. um, Culturally, we didn't they always spoke to each other in Chinese. I think they tried probably to speak to us in Chinese, but me and my brother just probably rebelled against that. I don't know, but eventually they were very flexible, so
Mhm.
they never required us to reply back to them in Mandarin.
Mhm.
So their attempt was just to send us to Chinese school, which I
Yeah.
was a poor student,
Yeah.
and I always kind of rebelled against really like doing well in that, because I just didn't want to be there. I wanted to be at home watching Saturday morning
Right.
cartoons. But yeah, so that's why my language skills are pretty subpar. I can
Mhm.
understand it far better than I can speak it. So I
Mhm.
can, if it's basic conversation, I know what my parents are saying.
Mhm. Right.
Even at church, I know what people are saying basically, but if it go into any more detail, it completely loses me.
Yeah.
Especially if they start talking about like Christian things and Bible things. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
with my parents, they will speak to each other in Chinese. But to me and my brother, it actually would be predominantly in English, or maybe a little Chinglish. But
Mhm.
we'd always reply back in English.
Right.
And then the other cultural things would be, I mean, yeah, and it was never a really big deal, but we did celebrate Chinese New Year,
Mhm.
Mid Autumn Festival, things like that, but little smaller things. It's not like we went really all out.
Right.
And if there was something going on in the community, so maybe we might get involved, but we weren't like, I wouldn't say it was a very strongly like reinforced cultural kind of a thing. I don't
Mhm.
think my
Right.
parents, for them, they're actually fairly westernized because of the fact that
Mhm.
they both worked in corporate America
I see.
within those big oil and gas firms,
Right.
in downtown. So they're working in a context where they're having to use English all the time.
Mhm.
They're very much
Yeah.
accustomed at that point to like, this is America, and you're being raised in America. So I would actually say they're fairly American, westernized in that sense.
Mhm.
Obviously, they stressed education. they stressed, doing well. But I, comparatively to some of my peers, I would still say my parents were probably more relaxed on that
Hmm.
than some of my peers, where, yeah, they brought home a B. I mean, it's like, it's over. For
Yeah.
me, I brought home a B. They're like, yeah, yeah, probably, you could probably do better. But
Yeah.
I never felt like this overwhelming sense of like I could never bring home anything less, than, I
Yeah.
mean, even though I know that's what they wanted of me, and I sometimes was motivated for that, but I didn't get that stereotypical, like, you know,
Yeah.
you're gonna
Yeah.
get punished for bringing home anything less than an A plus kind of a thing.
Hmm.
So
Right.
yeah, my parents are not stereotypical in that sense. I would say they're pretty hands off, in
Hmm.
that way, where obviously they wanted me to succeed educationally, and then obviously the career path I'm on now is not exactly what they had in mind and mapped
Right.
that out.
Yeah.
But they never really, and we could talk about that later. They never really, um, yeah, like put their foot down
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
that way, especially as I started making some career choices down the road.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. And so your parents, I guess, because they were so pretty relatively relaxed with your studies, did you ever feel like, did you ever pressure yourself to do well? Were you like a
Yeah.
self-discipline kind of
So
kid?
that would be where, yeah, the pressure would have to come from me, and
Mhm.
it wasn't always that. I was probably, a like a B plus A minus student, I
Yeah.
would say, middle school and in high school.
Hmm.
Um, I was not like, top
Right.
10% or anything like that. I still got into the University of Texas,
That's good.
back when it was easier to get into. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I was probably top quarter at Bel Air, but I wasn't like top 10% or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I'm probably a B plus A minus student. I don't think educationally I really got serious about it until actually college, and then
Hmm.
my grades reflected that.
Hmm.
But prior
Right.
to that, I wasn't as motivated as I guess they probably wanted me to be, but
Hmm.
I wasn't like um, I wasn't a failing student.
Right.
I
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think I was probably average compared to most
Yeah.
average students, but maybe compared to the other Asian Americans, maybe I was still on the lower end.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I definitely feel that too. It's like good enough student.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I was okay with that, and I never
Right.
got an overwhelming sense of pressure from my parents.
Hmm.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And how was the college application process for you? What were your like top schools?
Yeah. My aspiration was to get out of Texas.
Okay.
So I think I really wanted to go to Columbia because
Hmm.
I wanted to go to New York. I wanted
Hmm.
to like live in New York because my senior year I got a chance to go on a trip to New York for this
Okay.
school thing.
Uh-huh.
And so, man, I was like eyes open. Like when I stepped in, I mean, first time in Manhattan, I was like, whoa, this is
Yeah.
awesome. I've never, experienced anything like this. And so I really wanted to get into Columbia. I didn't get in. Um, my parents wanted me to apply to Stanford because I think that's their dream for one of their sons to get into Stanford, and neither one of us got in. So I applied there as well, but everything else was pretty much, Texas, schools that I applied for, and UT. I I kind of always thought I was probably going to go there anyways. My
Hmm.
brother was already there.
Hmm.
Some of my, church friends who were a grade above me were already there.
Hmm.
So I figured, yeah, I'm okay with that.
Hmm.
And that ended up being the on my list, the highest one that I actually got accepted into. So,
Okay.
so I ended up going to UT, but I would have totally gone to Columbia if I could have.
Hmm.
But
Right.
yeah, again, that's Ivy League school, and I just didn't have the grades for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And what did you major in college?
I started off as a bio pre med, so
Oh,
so
well.
typical. so, and I honestly didn't know what to do, at that time. And after 1 year of it, I was like, nah, this is. I was doing okay academically, like I said.
Mhm.
Actually, my best academic years were those first 2 years
Wow.
of
Mhm.
college. And so it wasn't because of the grades. It was just because I started thinking, wait a minute, I'm just going to be sitting here reading these big textbooks and memorizing stuff for the next like 8 years
Right.
of my life. Yeah, no, this is not what I wanted to do. So I transferred to the business school,
Mhm.
my second year, and really I was just following the footsteps of my older brother. So he was a business major. he was MIS, management information systems.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I ended up doing as well.
I
That's
see.
what I graduated with, a business degree.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
MIS. Yeah.
Okay. And how did you like decide to go into MIS?
Oh
What-
yeah, like I said, I was just copying him. I really didn't know what else to do, and
Uh-huh.
so that's what he was doing, and I was like, okay, yeah. So he's 3 years older. So by the time I transitioned into it, my second year, he just
Mhm.
graduated,
I see.
and so he got a job at Shell, and he came back to Houston and started working. And I'm like, okay, yeah, looks like it's
Yeah.
pretty easy to get a job. He told me how much he's getting paid. I'm like, oh wow, okay, cool. All right, that's your first job. That's all right, okay. I guess I'll do it. So I mean, really, nothing really inspirational. It was just simply that's what I was aware of because of what my brother did. And so
Right.
I just applied for the same. I just applied for the business school, got in, and I just chose the same major he did.
Hmm.
And I think overall, it still was a better fit for me in terms of being in the business school.
Hmm.
But honestly, if I could go back and do it all again, I would actually do something like in the humanities. I'd actually probably
Hmm.
do history or philosophy or something
Interesting.
like that. But obviously, that's all in hindsight.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So.
Okay. And how was the social adjustment for you in college?
Uh, it wasn't that bad because of the fact that so many of my friends, either from high school friends or from
Okay.
church, we all just happened to be going to UT. So I went in there already knowing a bunch of people, and because of my brother being there,
I see.
and just kind of, and this going later on to the spiritual life. If I knew about, which is now AACM,
Hmm.
Asian American Christian Fellowship, but back then it was called Chinese Bible Study.
Okay.
So I knew that was there. So I knew that would be like a safety net of friends
Hmm.
because
Right.
of the church friends that I had that were at UT were all a part of that fellowship.
Hmm.
So it wasn't so much of like a fear of not having friends or connections or felt
Right.
it was actually me like at that point wanting to kind of like, even though I'm surrounded by all these people I know, I wanted to like
Right.
pioneer and like I want to go, start something different. I don't want to keep associating with, so that was kind of a little bit of a prideful attitude initially. I didn't want to keep doing the same things that
Right.
everyone else was doing once they got to Austin.
Yeah.
And so my first year, I wasn't as connected with some of those groups, even though my roommate was totally a church friend, grew
Okay.
up in a youth group. He was my roommate, and he was connected to all those circles. So I still had connections, but I actually tried to forge like new friendships and try to kind of get out of that initially.
Hmm.
Eventually, I ended up straight up into all of that.
Yeah.
But initially, I actually was trying to not.
Okay. Yeah.
But in terms of, yeah, I just knew so many people already there by the time I got
Hmm.
there to Austin.
Yeah. And I guess that brings us to like your like I guess growth in the church. So when did you
Hmm.
start going to church?
Yeah, so that was end of middle school, so eighth grade.
Okay.
And that was through my brother first going, having been invited by church friends,
Hmm.
and then I kind of tagged along as well.
Okay. And was this HCC?
Yes, at HCC.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
awesome.
and
And
so
then
youth group was my first experience, and then I started. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I started going at the. Oh, I'm sorry. At the very end of seventh grade.
uh-huh.
And so the first thing they kept saying, you should really go to this thing called Discovery Camp. So Discovery Camp was the first like real experience. So I just started going like towards the end of the school year.
Hmm.
And then they kept pushing, hey, you should go Discovery Camp. I'm like, all right, cool. So
Hmm.
that was the first time I was really exposed to Christianity, like
Hmm.
having someone explain to me what is Christianity all about, what is the gospel of Jesus, those type
Hmm.
of things. That's the first time I made any kind of profession of
Hmm.
faith. And then it was eighth grade, kind of getting involved to some degree, but I didn't really get active until the high school youth group,
I see.
and then at Bel Air, because there was some crossover between some Bel Air friends and church
Mhm.
friends. There was a few that were at Bel Air, so that's kind of how I started getting even more connected. And so I would say I was a typical youth group kid
Mhm.
in the high school years. The only difference was just that my parents were just dropping me off at church, but I was there every Friday, on Sundays as well, because I live so close in Maryland. Like
Right.
I grew up like really close to Coulter, so it was like so easy for my parents just to drop me off.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so did your parents start going to church with you guys or just
No, no. For them, their attitude was like better to hang out at church than anywhere else.
Right,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So they don't have any faith com- commitments. They're fairly secular
Mhm.
in their outlook, and they're just for them they just thought it was a wholesome environment for
Mhm.
me to make some friends.
Right.
Um, and they never really thought it would take over my life in
Right.
the way
Yeah.
it has.
Like
Um, because at that point they were just like, yeah, it's just a good place for him to make some good friends.
right, yeah. And how was it just like, going to a Chinese church specifically?
Yeah, so I mean that was the most like experience of Chinese people are, I
Right.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
like, oh wow, it's every so that was like I said earlier, it was helpful in me fully coming to appreciate my identity
Mhm.
as a Chinese American.
Mhm.
So being there and no longer being like ashamed of being
Right.
of being Chinese. So yeah, I think that with also the friend groups that I had at Bel Air was formative in
Mhm.
doing that.
Yeah. And
Um, yeah, so I mean, I think the only downside is that like I said earlier, then my circles got really
yeah.
uniform,
Right.
and even in college they
Mhm.
were still fairly uniform, even though I tried to branch out initially. But even when I was branching out, I was still hanging out with other Asian Americans,
Right, right,
just
right,
not
right.
church going ones.
Yeah.
um, but then eventually when I started getting so there was a period of time I kind of not walked away from the faith, but I was very distant from my
Mhm.
faith. But then when I started really coming back to my faith, it was with those fellowships that were, you
Mhm.
know, Chinese American, and so it was good in many ways, but it was also limiting as well. So
Yeah. And so did you join the ministry at UT like freshman year
so
or
no, nothing actively. So even though like that Chinese Bible study, which is Dao
right.
AACM, I was never actively involved. I just had a whole bunch of friends there. So sometimes I would show up. I would say those were my first 2 years of college. I was probably the furthest away from active involvement in any kind of personal
Mhm.
faith, devotion, and also any organizational religion, whether it's church or fellowship.
Mhm.
So even though I would occasion the church that most of my friends would go to,
Mhm.
I would occasion the fellowship meetings. I was still I was actually on paper, I was part of a small group. I was just one of those members that rarely ever showed up.
Right.
And yeah, so that was kind of my first 2 years, and I
Mhm.
was trying to get. I was more into like the party scene the
Mhm.
first two years, and it was really it was really the last 2 years of college that was a very different experience when I got more involved in those groups.
Mhm. And what like kind of brought you back to those groups?
I think it was just trying things that the world had to offer
Right.
that I thought would satisfy, but
Mhm.
left me still very empty and disappointed. And
Mhm.
so there are a lot of like what as Christians we would call idols,
Mhm.
not idols in terms of like literal statues that
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
bowing down to, but idols in terms of like things of this world, things that the world has to offer, whether it's relationships, whether it's just pleasure from just mindless pleasure and joy of just partying or whatever. All these things that I thought would make me feel more mature and
Mhm.
more like and just satisfied. So whether it was the partying, whether it's, I was in a relationship at the time, and I was actually doing even though I was doing a lot of partying, I was actually doing really well academically for some reason, but that didn't even satisfy me either. And so
Mhm.
I think all of those what we would call idols and things that I thought would give me a sense of purpose and identity, and significance, were really like not meeting up to what it promised. And I thought it was going to be better than that. And so, also there are just various trials and hardships where I ended up just really disillusioned with the kind of the path I was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think it was just God's goodness and grace to me
Mm-hmm.
that yeah, kind of really brought me back on track with Him personally, in a relationship with Him, and also in community with Christians. So, like I said, my roommate at the time was always still very involved in his faith personally, and also organizationally with those with the church and with the fellowship. And so, I do remember those mornings I would wake up and I would see him spending time reading his Bible and praying,
Mm-hmm.
and I would be really annoyed. I was like just so annoyed that he'd be doing that. Not because he was doing it to show off, not because he was at all, like he was just living his life and living out his faith.
Mm-hmm.
We just happened to be in the same dorm room, so he couldn't hide from me, and he couldn't
Right.
hide that. So, but I just remember being so annoyed by that. But I think it was really God actually reminding me and convicting me, like, hey, look, you see, that's really a reminder of the kind of relationship that I want with you as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think He used that as a constant reminder for me.
Mm-hmm.
A roommate who was just doing his own thing to be
Right.
faithful in his own faith, not preaching to me, not like, guilt tripping me. Him just being faithful was enough for me to feel guilty.
Yeah, right.
and to deal with God. So God was gracious to me. And I would say, yeah, my second half of college was a very different experience, and I started getting more actively involved in that church that a lot of my friends were going to, and also that fellowship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so your roommate was from HCC, right?
Yeah, he's from HCC as well.
Yeah, are you still
Yeah.
friends with him now?
Still friends with him now, and he is also a pastor as well right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. And where did you go after you graduated?
So that's a great, interesting story. So my first job was at Houston Chinese Church.
Uh-huh. Wow.
So I graduated with a business degree.
Mm-hmm.
I had a job offer at PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Okay.
One of the big, what is it now? Is it still Big
4?
Five? Is it
I
Big
think
Four?
it's
It's
Big
Big
4
Four.
now.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
Big Four now. Yeah, it used to be Big Six, and then it
Oh,
was Big
wow.
Five, and now Big Four. Okay, so that's where I got a job as a business consultant.
Uh-huh.
So I was set to go. The way I got to that point was actually a struggle, because at that point in my walk, my faith journey, I was actually not wanting to go into corporate America.
Mm-hmm.
I went on this extended missions trip to East Asia
Mm-hmm.
the summer after my junior year,
Okay.
and that opened up a world of possibilities for me
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to Christian missions,
Mm-hmm. Right.
of dedicating my life to sharing the love and the message of Jesus
Mm-hmm.
to peoples that may not have the same opportunities that we have here in the States. And that was something that really caught my attention. And I started really feeling a tugging and an urging to want to do something like that after I graduated. That was the first time that me and my parents had conflict over my faith commitments.
Mm-hmm.
Up to that point, like I said earlier, they were always supportive. They thought it was just a good, wholesome thing.
Right.
And then I actually was going to make a real life decision based on it. And they're like, whoa, hold on. What? Because my desire was, could I do this 1 year internship where I live overseas, serving with this organization, doing some missionary work in East Asia? And in their minds, two factors. One is, we moved and immigrated from there so that you could be here. What are you doing? And secondly, what are you doing? Because typically in missionary work, you would have to raise your own funding. You don't have a normal, you're not salaried. So you would actually have to raise money to fund yourself.
I see.
And especially my father, could not abide that thought of me graduating from college with a degree that he helped pay for, and then me turn around and start asking other people for money to support me. He's like, dude, get a job. You just you're about to graduate. I
Mhm.
put you through college, not for you to go ask people for money, but for you to be able to make a living for yourself. So
Mhm.
it wasn't so much I don't think you should spread the message of Christianity. That really didn't, like, that wasn't, it was more of like, how could you not be working?
Right.
What are you doing asking others? So that was actually that was a struggle for him in particular. A long struggle for me that senior year of like, oh, what should I do? Should I
Mhm,
follow
mhm,
my
mhm.
faith and my Lord Jesus, or should I honor my parents? You know, and that typical struggle. And I ended up deciding I'm going to honor my parents' wishes, because really what they were asking for me to do is to try to work for a few years,
Mhm.
see see how it feels, see if you like it. If you really are unsatisfied after a few years, then let's talk about.
Okay. Mhm.
So my parents are at least reasonable enough to
Right.
at least entertain the option down the road.
Yeah.
So I came to the point where like, okay, I really want to do it now, but I mean, it's not gonna, God really wants me to do it, the opportunity will be there.
Mhm.
So I ended up interviewing, going through the whole interviewing process, got the job, all planned out, all mapped out for me to go start working at the end of the summer when I graduated.
Mhm.
I was at camp. I was at Camp Impact, and guess who my roommate was? I was a counselor, right? So I was like, at that age, I was a senior counselor, being a
Right.
counselor at
Right.
camp, and my roommate was Pastor Fred.
Oh.
So back then we were at a college campus. Did you ever go to that one? Where we used to be at a college campus, Blinn College. It
I don't
wasn't at Forest Glen.
know.
It was so it was at a so it was just me. It was just two counselors would share a room together. So
Mhm.
I'm in a room for a whole week with Pastor Fred, and so he's asking me about my life and what I'm gonna do. So he basically says, "Oh, so I see what you're doing. Your parents want you to at least have a job, like with you actually getting paid. Well, our youth pastor, the one that I grew up with, has
Mhm.
recently moved on, and we can't seem to find a youth pastor. And right now, we're just offering 1 year internships to work with the
Okay.
youth. Would you like to do that? That's a job." I'm like, oh yeah, that is a job. Doesn't pay much, but like, but then at that point, I'm like, thanks, but no thanks. I already kind of have my
Mhm.
next few years set. I already told this other company that I'm about to fly out to start training and working for them.
Right.
I prayed about it that night. The God, let your will be done, whatever you want for my life. I'll tell you the crazy thing. 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from the same recruiter,
Mhm.
very apologetically telling me, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So I graduated in 2001
Mhm.
in Houston. That was when the dot-com bubble,
Right.
nationwide dot-com bubble was bursting. Back then,
Mhm.
all these these new startups,
Yeah.
were happening, and then it eventually, like, the bubble burst, and
Right.
so there was a lot of tech companies that were folding, and then we were in Houston, and that 2001 was Enron. That's when the
Oh.
Enron
Yeah.
scandal happened, and that caused a real kind of downturn in the economy, especially in the tech industry, which was the consulting industry that I was going to
I
be
see.
working
Mhm.
in. And so there was a lot of people's job offers being rescinded.
Mhm.
Mine, at least, wasn't rescinded. It was just simply they froze
I see.
the hiring, and they pushed back everyone's start date to the next year.
Mhm. Okay.
And
Wow.
so she was like, "I really hope you have something to do for a year. The job's there for you a year from now."
Mhm.
And I said, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you." I was probably the best phone call she had all day, because
Uh-huh.
everyone else was probably upset. I was like, "This is great. This is awesome. 1 year. I just need 1 year." And so I
Right.
went back to my parents. Okay, look, I got a year for free. Can I do this internship? And they're like, "Okay, I guess so." And I did it. So my first job out of college was working for Houston Chinese Church as
Wow.
their youth intern
Mhm.
for 1 year, and that was it for me. After that 1 year, I was sold. Like, this is what I think God wants me to do with my career.
Right.
And God really was gracious to change my parents' attitude by the end of that year. It's
Mhm.
not as if they were like super like, yay, we
Yeah,
totally want you to be in ministry, but they were supportive.
that's good.
And they realized, this is something that he loves, something that he's good at, and he's not going to be a bum on the street, kind of a thing. Always begging people for money. I think they all their kind of fears and stereotypes was kind of addressed as I actually, did the job for a year.
Mhm.
And so when it came time for what to do after that year, the church was like, hey, we're willing to make this into a more full-time, indefinite position. You can just come on as our youth director.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was like, yeah, actually, I really want to do that.
Mhm.
And so I eventually made the decision and I called Price Waterhouse, the recruiter. I'm like, I got a better offer now.
Wow.
I didn't tell them it was Houston Chinese Church. I just said, sorry, I won't be taking the offer.
Mhm.
And yeah, the rest is history in terms of I've been doing church work, pastoring, starting off with youth ministry right out of college until
Right.
this day. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think you went to Vancouver for a bit.
Yes, yes. So I did the youth ministry for 4 years.
Mhm.
So after the 4 years, I got married at the last year.
Mhm.
So my wife is Teresa,
Mhm.
and she's a
Right.
school teacher. And we moved up to Vancouver, British Columbia, because the seminary that I was going to attend, it's called
Mhm.
Regent College,
Mhm.
and that's where it's located. So it's up there in Canada, British Columbia. Um, I chose it because of the one of the professors. So J.I. Packer was a professor that I read a lot of his books.
Right.
And then
Uh-huh.
he was a professor there. He's a retired professor, but at least he was still there, and that was the impetus for me to go there. And then when I actually went to Vancouver, when I checked it out before I actually like
Mhm.
applied,
Mhm.
I'm like, well, Vancouver is awesome. This city is amazing. The
Yeah.
weather is great. I mean, growing up in Houston, right? I mean, the weather
Mhm.
is just like night and day. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so that was the impetus to move up there. And I did my seminary education, 3 years up there, and
Mhm.
then another 3 years of pastoring. I was an associate pastor of a small neighborhood Baptist church that
Mhm.
I was a part of up there, and I did that for 3 years. Our daughter was born in 2011, and
Mhm.
that was the next kind of motivation to want to move home.
I
Our
see.
kind of vision of raising a family was ideally in context of around our family.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, if that was possible, we were very open to that. So I started looking in Houston for pastoring opportunities. And at that time, HCC was like, "Hey, actually, we got a position open. Would you be interested?" I'm like, "Really? Wow, okay." I of course, I had all the relationships established, and the job opportunities seemed to be exactly kind of what I wanted to do. So
Mhm.
yeah, so came back in 2011, and since then I've been the English minister and then the English pastor since
Mhm.
then. So yeah.
Awesome. And so what kind of inspired you to go towards like the pastoring route?
Yeah. So the first inspiration is just in terms of like wanting to just do Christian work and as
Right.
a missionary. That was because of that missions trip, and that was just me kind of. I had a conversation with a missionary who he asked me very straightforward. He's like, "Look, what if money wasn't a factor for you?
Mhm.
Financial security for you and your future family, you knew it was set. You didn't have to worry about taking care of anyone, yourself or anyone else financially.
Mhm.
What would you want to do with all of your time?"
Mhm. Right.
And I was like, I want to do what you're doing. Like, I want to do this.
Yeah.
I want to teach the Bible. I want to help people to know about God and
Mhm.
what it means to be a follower of God. Like, that's kind of what I wanted to do. So that was the first like impetus. Like, I think this is what I want to do with my life. The pastoring was more after that 1 year at HCC, where I realized that I had an affinity towards helping explain the Bible to people
Mhm.
and to be able to help walk with them, not necessarily as non-Christians trying to understand what it means to be a Christian, but I had a real passion on helping younger Christians grow up in their faith and understanding the
Mhm.
further implications of their
Yeah.
faith, which is really what a pastor is more accustomed to doing, in contrast to maybe a missionary who is more working front lines with people who have no clue or very limited knowledge of the faith. So I think that was more just through experience. I realized what was a better fit for me.
Hmm. Yeah. And so how have you seen like HCC change since you were a youth minister to
Yeah,
pastor?
yeah. I mean, so definitely, the history of the church and in the church planting that we've done, I
Hmm.
was able to kind of see some of that, maybe not be as actively involved, but just at least observing.
Right.
So I remember when WHCC was kind of starting off, um, and then I was actively in the youth group when Fort Bend Community Church began, and that was a real sad moment for the youth group because we were like, oh, our friends are now like having to go to, you know,
Yeah.
um, and then so I kind of observed that, and then for my own experience, I think kind of some of the bigger changes I would say would be, I mean, very thankful for Pastor Fred. He has been
Mhm.
a staple stable kind of figure to helping the English speaking congregation to grow and develop over the years. And so I guess when I was going there, there definitely was an English congregation already there where it wasn't just teenagers and youth. There were already young professionals and families there. But I think I've seen just that kind of development where it becomes a real full-fledged congregation, where you have a wide range of life stages. Where
Mhm.
before, in most Chinese heritage churches like ours, it's going to start off where the English is going to be predominantly the children of the immigrants.
Mhm.
And it takes a while for it to kind of achieve all those various life stages. So I've
Right.
definitely seen that happening, and really appreciative. I think because of our location, we have a unique opportunity to have a high degree of college students because of Rice,
Mhm. Mhm.
and a lot of graduate students because of the medical center.
Mhm.
So there is, at our church, compared to some of the other Chinese churches that are more suburban, we
Yeah.
have a higher demographic of students, college and graduate and young professionals, because young professionals, they don't really want to live out in the suburbs with their
Mhm.
parents.
Mhm.
They want to live in the city. They want to live in
Right.
cool places like the Heights, right? um, or Midtown, in the museum district, like, and so that's where we also have, just because of our location being one of the fewer Chinese churches, kind of in basically in the inner loop, right?
Mhm.
So I've seen that grow in terms of the student ministry and the young adult ministry. And then even in, I would say, the last like 10 years, one cool thing is seeing us uh, being able to uh, bring in and really welcome non-Chinese Americans
Mhm.
into the English
Right.
congregation. So branching out among Asian Americans. So, the
Mhm.
next biggest group we would have is
Mhm.
Korean Americans.
Mhm.
And then we have some Vietnamese Americans, Filipino, Japanese. Those are, more spattering, but we have other Asian Americans. And I would say among our English congregation, about almost 10% of them are going to be Asian Americans of non-Chinese descent.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah.
And then even in the last few years, you see a growing number of even non-Asians
Right.
coming into our community and sticking around. And it's not just because they happen to be married to
Mhm.
a Chinese person, which is in the past the typical reason why there would be a non-Asian person among us. It's
Mhm.
because of a mixed marriage,
Mhm.
um, a ethnically mixed marriage. The other reason would be they are preparing to be a missionary in China, and so, or Taiwan or
Yeah.
something like that. And so they want to come here to
Right.
prepare, to have the immersive cultural experience, the language experience.
Mhm.
Um, but I would say in the last, 5 to 10 years, more and more among Rice students, that's
Mhm.
been a huge,
Right.
where a lot of our non-Asians might be, because of Rice, medical, the medical students,
Mhm.
and just, there is a desire among uh, just Christians to have a church that is committed to biblical teaching. And by that, what we mean is that the teaching that happens on a Sunday, a service,
Mm-hmm.
is not just like, hey, some thoughts that the pastor had this week about something interesting that he just wants to talk about, or what's
Mm-hmm.
going on in the news. Let's just talk about whatever's happening and try to like give a Christian spin on it. There's a growing number of Christians who really just want to hear the word of God, the
Mm-hmm.
Bible, which Christians believe is to be the very words of God, written long ago, but still living and active and relevant for us today. And he still speaks to us today through a preacher preaching the word of God to us. And I think that kind of commitment to biblical preaching, where we allow the word of the Bible to really shape and direct the teaching ministry of our church. So it's not just what's my hobby horses as the preacher. What are my interests? I'm just like, whatever the Bible teaches, I want to convey that, and also, of course, still make it relevant and applicable for today. But I think that commitment to biblical teaching has actually been a big reason why there are going to be non-Asians who say, you know what, I'm just not finding that at my church right now here in Houston. And I somehow gotten connected with you guys, either just searching on the internet or through a friend. And even though I wasn't at all looking for a Chinese heritage church, I'm not Chinese. I never really had Chinese friends, but my desire from a church is biblical teaching, biblical preaching. And that trumps the desire to be around people of like ethnicity. And so they would rather be even the odd man out and being the minority in our context. They're okay with that because of the fact that we are offering them biblical teaching. I think that's been a huge reason why we have had non-Asians be a part of us who had no connection, no relational connection at all. They just looked us up on the internet. They kind of checked us out a little bit. And they're like, hey, the Bible's taught here. All right, we'll come and we'll just settle in. And I think you've encountered some of them at our church where they didn't really know anyone before, but they're very much a part of us now, because we try our best, even though we recognize it is still an immigrant Chinese church. The Chinese language, the Chinese culture is still very prevalent, but we're on the English side, it's all in English, so there isn't a language barrier. And we try our best to be as warm and welcoming to whoever is willing to be to make a home with us. And so I just been encouraged to see that development over the years of us doing what we can to branch out, creating an environment where any of our friends and colleagues, whether they're Asian or not, might be able to find a spiritual home among us if they so choose.
Right. Yeah, and can you explain a little bit about like the denomination of HTC?
Yeah. So it's officially non-denominational, meaning that we are not affiliated with any other larger organizational body. It was started 45 years ago by UH graduate students.
Oh, wow.
Predominantly from Taiwan and Hong Kong. And initially, actually, they were going to church. So these believers who were graduate students at UH were going to church at Chinese Baptist Church, CBC, because that was the only Chinese church in town.
Right.
Knowing where they're located, you can see how it was a little bit far for UH students.
Yeah.
And eventually they, and not all of them came from Baptist backgrounds either, right? So it kind of all depends on just whatever denominational background they came from back home. So it was a bit of an eclectic mix of graduate students, but the commonality, they were all UH graduate students, and they're all Chinese immigrants. And they really couldn't find much of, it was too difficult for them to really assimilate into the First Baptist or the Second, these larger majority culture churches. CBC was a place where they could, but eventually they decided to form their own church. So starting off as a Bible study and then eventually becoming a church, and then in '75 is when they incorporated, and then they started meeting at South Main Baptist Church in Midtown, and then eventually in '82 is when they built the current building on the campus that we are now. And so the way they organize themselves because of those, I mean, I can't say for sure, but I'm assuming because of those Baptist influences of CBC, and also the church that that was hosting them initially was a Baptist church. And because if you don't plan on being part of a larger denominational body,
Mm-hmm.
then then organizing yourself like a Baptist would be the most conducive way of organizing yourself. So like, we're not Baptist
Mm-hmm.
officially, like we're not part of a Baptist denomination, but all Baptist denominations are all voluntary associations anyway.
Okay.
Each church owns their own property, selects their own leaders, makes their own decision with the budget and everything. So it's all a voluntary association if they were a part of the denomination. We're not even that, but we are organized very similarly, meaning that we believe in local church autonomy. That means all the decisions are just conducted by the congregation itself, led by lay leaders within the church.
Mm-hmm.
And then we so that's very similar. So if you want to compare it to any other kind of denomination, it would be most comparable to a Baptist church,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
in the way that we kind of organize and structure ourselves. And then the cool thing is, through all those years of church planting, we've kind of developed a network of sister churches
Mm-hmm. Right.
across the greater Houston area. And then we have those partnerships with CBC, like you mentioned before. But we are independent in that sense of being an independent, non-denominational church, but with close networks and partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, is there a difference between the teachings of like HCC, non-denominational churches, and Baptist churches?
Um, Not necessarily. It probably is going to be depending on, even among Baptist churches, their overall theological slant, if they're
Mm-hmm.
going to be more progressive or conservative
I see.
in their interpretation of the Bible and of historic Christian doctrines.
Mm-hmm.
So we would probably be more uh, described as aligned with the more conservative interpretation of Scripture, aligned
Mm-hmm.
with the historic interpretations of these Christian doctrines. So, in that sense, now we're similar to Baptists in the fact that we only baptize adult, not just necessarily adult, but people who can consciously profess faith.
I see.
So
Mm-hmm.
a teenager could do it too, but instead of baptizing
Right.
babies, yeah.
Right.
So that's probably the only thing that's distinct about us that would be more like a Baptist church is the fact that we don't have any denominational body or individual like a bishop
Okay.
have any authority over us. It's all the local church
I see.
handles all of that, and we only baptize those who have professed the faith in Jesus as Lord and Savior. So that makes us look and feel more Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I guess when you say, are we similar to Baptists in our teaching, you would probably have to ask more further, like which Baptist denomination, which Baptist church are you referring to? Because there is such a spectrum even among them.
Okay. Interesting.
But those practices are very similar in terms of we are local church autonomy and believers baptism. Those are the two distinguishing things of a Baptist church you'd find at our church. We just don't use the label as a Baptist church.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And were there any other like Chinese churches that you were aware of? Or was CBC kind of like the only one?
Back then, that's the only one I'm aware of. So my understanding is that CBC, they're in their 50 something, like they've been around. I mean, I'm sure you could find out. But they're the oldest Chinese church, and then I think it's us. I think it's HCC, and so 75, so 45 years. And then out of CBC, there has been a few churches that have come out of it.
I see.
Whether it was an intentional church plant or maybe a split, I mean, you might need to ask them. But for us, by God's grace, we've never had a split. They've always been intentional church planting. So the first one was Clear Lake.
Okay.
Because NASA, the shuttle, the shuttle program, and there was back in the the 80s, there was a lot of engineers, Chinese immigrants moving out to the Clear Lake area, working for NASA. And so that's where we eventually started Clear Lake Chinese Church. The second one was out in Port Lavaca. Port Lavaca, there's Point Comfort Chinese Church. There's Formosan, the plastic factory over there.
Okay.
So that's why there's a lot of Taiwanese living in Port Lavaca. The third church plant would be West Houston Chinese Church. And then the fourth would be Fort Bend Community Church. And there's also that global church plant that we were involved with in Kazakhstan.
Oh, wow.
And that was, I don't remember the timeline exactly. That might have been around the same time as Fort Bend.
Okay.
And then, and you're aware of the Pearland one, which we're wrapping up. And then those other churches, like W in particular, has been very active in church planting as well. So they planted the Katy Church, and also the one up in the Woodlands. It's called, I think they just call it North Houston.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is the one Kazakhstan still running?
It's still running. I don't think we are as actively involved. We used to support it financially, but I think that commitment eventually ended a few years back. Okay. So not too much active support, but she's not with us right now because her and her family are living in Germany. But Aliona Chen, who was our English, administrative assistant, she was saved. She became a Christian through that church because she's from Kazakhstan.
Right.
And so, yeah, she's, evidence of the fruit of that church plant.
Yeah.
And then over at CBC, Pastor Oleg, I don't know if you guys interviewed him, but Pastor Oleg Shu, he's from Kazakhstan. He's from Almaty. So he actually, I think also that church is where he became a Christian as well.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, we definitely still have, we could see there was some good fruit out of it, but I can't really tell you myself how they're doing. I'm not as familiar. I'm sure there are some people you can ask at church that would know, but I wouldn't know.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's cool.
Yeah.
And so how large is the congregation at HCC right now?
Well, pre-pandemic,
right?
We were, I would say, a conservative estimate would be 900 on an average Sunday. I think it kind of gets closer to 1,000, but if you average it out, it's probably low 900s, including youth and children. And that would have the English congregation, the Mandarin congregation, the Cantonese congregation, and also the Pearland campus. So that's including Pearland still. Members right now, because we have a membership meeting coming up, so I think the number they said was I forget, but it's like right under 600.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, actually, no, low 600s.
Okay.
I forget the exact numbers. Low 600s is in terms of active members. English side, I can tell you that exactly. English side, we have 267 active English members, if you're including the youth, which majority of them would be youth, the children of the Chinese side families, but they worship with us in the English congregation, so we still count them. But English adults, it's 240 active English adults. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And how large is like the Chinese and the Mandarin and Cantonese congregation?
So if you're just talking about average on a Sunday pre-pandemic, I would say, and we can kind of go back and look at those little numbers they have on the bulletin, right? But I think it's, I think Mandarin and English are pretty much about the same. I would say around 300.
Okay.
Right? Kind of hovers around that. And then Cantonese would be basically like around 100.
Right.
And then Pearland's going to be like, let's say 75.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's not including children, and then you have to add children to that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that would include youth because they would be counted in. Well, actually, I don't know. Anyways, yeah. I mean, it's about like, so, it would be Mandarin and English would be the two larger congregations.
Right,
That's why we worship in the bigger sanctuary.
right,
And then and then the Cantonese and then Pearland.
right. I was always curious as to like how they counted people. Like, do they just have like a
They
ticker?
literally have the guy upstairs,
Oh,
one of
I
the
did not
AV
know that.
people upstairs. You know the AV room up
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
They got a little
They just.
counter, and they're just like, and they have a chart with all the pews, and
Hmm.
so they count the row and they put the number
Oh,
down, and so one person does it, and then the second person does another count. So there's two counts,
oh wow.
and to try to be as accurate as
Oh,
possible.
I didn't know
But
that.
again, if you're out in the lobby, they can't see you,
Hmm. Hmm.
and yeah, if you're just standing in the back, like holding a baby, then they
Right,
can't see
right,
you either.
right.
They can only just see the last pew,
I see. Oh
Yeah.
wow, I didn't know they
But that's what they
actually
do. They do that. They literally sit there like,
count. That's
yeah.
funny. And I guess so the English congregation has grown like quite large. How has that affected the initial purpose and mission of HCC as like a Chinese church?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yeah, I think it's just enhanced it. It's a great opportunity to have because you grew up in the youth group,
Mm-hmm.
myself as well. If it was just immigrant parents trying their best to lead a youth group, to
Hmm.
teach the Bible, to connect with adolescents who are wrestling with, growing up in a bicultural setting,
Hmm.
um, it would be quite challenging for immigrant parents, first generation immigrants, to effectively do that. I think the fact
Right.
that you have a second generation congregation, many adults who have gone through that same experience, is
Hmm.
such a blessing to an immigrant church, especially to the children of first generation immigrants,
Hmm.
because you have Chinese Americans who are older than you, who went through the same thing, the bicultural experience, and also so not only just being Chinese in the States, but also being a Christian too, and all of that thing as you're dealing with identity. Man, it's such a blessing to have
Hmm.
a English ministry where you have especially younger members,
Right.
either college students, graduate students, young professionals, to be a source of influence, setting a good example, just being like mentors and disciplers, or what we would call discipler, or you can call it a mentor in
Right.
the life of
Mhm.
these children of first generation immigrants. I think that's one huge blessing, and then a blessing for me as someone who is second generation, as an adult now. I don't need that per se myself, but you know what was a blessing for me is I've got first generation parents who
Mhm.
don't believe in God, who
Mhm.
don't go to church, and I hope and pray they do. And I know if they ever do, they've got a solid Chinese church
Right.
where
Yeah.
they can be able to grow in their faith right next, because they live in Bel Air right now. And so
Mhm.
it's just, so I want there to be a vibrant, healthy Chinese heritage church here in this area, because there's still plenty of of Chinese immigrants
Mhm.
coming still,
Right.
and immigrants like my parents who came a generation
Yeah.
ago, but they still need, Lord willing, that they'll be, going to church one day,
Mhm.
and then, I think, it's also another factor is, um, I think, to be honest, I don't think the experiences and the opportunities that I received at Houston Chinese Church at such an early stage in my career,
Mhm.
I don't think I would have had those opportunities in a majority culture church.
Mhm. Right.
If I was in the typical church that was majority white,
Mhm.
um, because of just my experience, whether in my seminary experience or in the church I was at up in Vancouver, which was not a Chinese church,
Mhm.
and even talking to my friends who are either just members of a majority culture church or
Mhm.
serving on, I
Right.
think the opportunities for me to be like the primary preacher
Yeah.
at right out of a few years, like 3 years out of seminary, and to be
Mhm.
like, that would never happen.
Right. Yeah.
um And I think that it also just provides opportunities for leadership and to exercise giftings for Asian Americans or Chinese Americans
Mm-hmm.
in a minority-led church that would be more challenging in a
Mm-hmm.
majority culture church. So I think that's another opportunity where, you know what, like I really think that what Houston needs, being such a diverse city, is it needs um, churches that are committed to reaching all peoples.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But when we typically think of churches that are trying to do that and that are multi-ethnic and have a multi-ethnic mission,
Mm-hmm.
it's typically understood it's a majority white church
Mm-hmm.
trying to branch out.
Yeah.
But the ethos and the culture is still coming from a particular cultural context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And even though they're trying to be as welcoming, but it is still for minorities going to be a bit of a hurdle to really find a home there. So I
Mm-hmm.
think we still need that to happen. And I'm so encouraged that more majority culture churches in Houston are being more mindful to be more multicultural, more
Yeah.
multi-ethnic. But what we also need are ethnic churches, immigrant churches,
Right.
to aim for the same thing coming from another side of the spectrum. So
Mm-hmm.
these are the majority white churches trying to grow more diverse and reaching a greater diversity of Houston. And then even the minority churches with minority-led pastors trying to do the same thing as
Mm-hmm.
well, still valuing our unique relationship with our culture, with the first generation immigrants. And I don't ever want to lose that. I want to keep strengthening that. But at the same time, I think we can offer, as an English congregation, an English speaking minority-led pastors, but
Mm-hmm.
minority pastors, to add to the voice, add to the efforts to try to reach a greater people. So it's not just trying to reach diverse people by having them ultimately go to still a church that is still majority white, but they can also come here too. That's one that's majority Asian.
Yeah.
But we're all trying to aim for the same thing, just
Mm-hmm.
coming from a different perspective. And even if we still always remain with a majority of Chinese or Asian, I think that's fine, because it's not as if we're not just doing it just because it's so comfortable. And I know that is a danger, that sometimes we will choose to be at a place like a Chinese American would choose to be at a place like Houston Chinese Church
Mm-hmm.
because it's comfortable,
Right.
if it's familiar. And if that's the only motivation, I would want to challenge that, but I wouldn't challenge that by saying you necessarily have to go to a multi-ethnic church or a majority white church, or even a majority African American or a Latino. I would simply say, if you feel too comfortable and too like everything's too uniform and similar and too easy in a Chinese church, it's probably because you're still way too much in a bubble. Because in a Chinese church, there's actually a lot of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, there may not be a lot of ethnic diversity,
Right.
but in a Chinese church, you have generational diversity that you don't find in a lot of young, hip, up and coming church plants today in Houston. There's a lot of, and I wish them well. I think as long as they're preaching the gospel, hey, I wish these church plants well. But if you go and visit them, everyone's in their 20s. Everyone's either a student or they're all just, they're all the same age.
Mm-hmm.
I love how in a Chinese church, you always have generational diversity of varying life stages. You have grandmas, old grandmas, and you have little babies, right? And by the very nature of a Chinese church, you always have that generational diversity. You also have cultural diversity. Even though we're ethnically very similar, culturally, the first generation versus the second generation versus the third generation immigrant, Taiwan versus mainland, Hong Kong, right? And then you have, Singaporean Chinese. And so there's so many cultural, historical beef there, as well. So it's not as if like everyone's always on the same page. So there is a lot of potential for conflict and struggle. Too easy. in a Chinese church is probably because our circles are way too small. And we need to
Hmm.
actually try to get to know someone
Yeah.
on the other congregation or someone of a different age. And there's always going to be someone available there to help you experience diversity. So
Right.
granted, we don't have as much ethnic diversity, but we've got cultural diversity, we've got linguistic diversity,
Hmm.
we've got generational diversity, and that is that's quite a bit. You
Hmm.
know, that's pretty stretching, and you need the gospel of Jesus to unify, us just as much as you would need to if you were in a church of white, black, Asian, Hispanic, but they're all in their 20s. They're all like,
Yeah.
they're all working professionals,
Right.
middle class working professionals. You know, they have a lot of similarity, and that's what draws them together.
Hmm.
But they have their challenges. They have their ethnic differences. Um, and I think, yes, we have things that draw us together that are similar, but we also have a lot of differences. So
Hmm.
I just think that the whole conversation about diversity is important, but I don't think it should be limited to just talking about ethnic diversity,
Hmm.
as if that's the only important kind of diversity, which I do value, but I don't think that that means what's happening in HCC is less important. The kind of work we're doing in trying to build a unified church amidst all of our diversities
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
not less important and less meaningful than what a church is doing that's multi-ethnic,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's just kind of my take. I mean, maybe I'm just self-justifying what the job I have in the church I'm
Yeah.
at. But no, I really think that there's something to be said about that, and that hopefully is added to the conversation about church diversity.
Yeah, I think so too. And what are some like potential challenges, if any, because of the demographic and generational shifts within like the Chinese church?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so definitely, I think with our church, the challenge is because we are more urban and we don't have the advantage that some of our suburban sister churches have, where there is a stronger family um, connection between the congregations. Like, so you would be unique in
Mm-hmm.
the sense that you're still, you graduate by you're at Rice, but you're still at HEC, so you're still at the church with your parents on the
Hmm.
Chinese side. But if you look at most of the English side and Chinese side members, there's no blood relation, there's no
Hmm.
family relation,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
so that I think because of our demographic, we're growing, but we're growing with newer people coming in
Hmm.
to Houston and coming to our church that have no connections with people on the other congregation. So I think that's always going to be a unique challenge for us, is that we need to find ways to still pursue our ministries that are related but also distinct because of our language differences and the kind of target groups that we're trying to reach,
Hmm.
but to still find ways to find connections and unity between us, because it's always going to be a bit more challenging in, like, Fort Bend, for example.
Hmm.
You're going to have more people on the English side related to people on the Chinese side, because by that point, when those people in the English side the youth grow up, they're working, they find, and if they happen to still be in Houston, and they finally like get married and settle down, and they're living in the Heights as a young couple, living it up in a real hip, cool place. But then eventually, they start having kids, and
Hmm.
they start thinking about schools.
Hmm.
I'm going to send my kid to school, and they're like, these schools in this area are not that good. So where do they start thinking? They start thinking about their school system growing up in the suburbs. And so they're more likely to eventually, and the houses are cheaper, and they want to, again, having more kids, they want to buy a bigger house. They're going to move back out to Fort Bend. And then they're looking for a church. They'll potentially go back to Fort Bend Community Church where their parents still are. So
Hmm.
that dynamic is more likely in a suburban Chinese church, like Fort Bend, Pearland, Katy,
Right.
Woodland.
Hmm.
Not so much for HCC. Um, that's something that we can't count on, that these youth eventually are going to like grow up and then want to come back
Right.
here.
Yeah.
Um, it all depends on just kind of what industry that they end up in and things like that, right? So that's where I think our church is always going to have a bigger challenge of keeping us connected, because there's not going to be as many natural connections like you might have in a suburban context.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as for like planting church planting, what's like the purpose of
Yeah,
planting churches in Houston,
good
especially like
question.
Chinese churches? Yeah.
Yeah, so the initial reason, which is because HEC functioned like a hub, like a real central campus,
Right.
right? So that eventually, it was located in a great place because a lot of these people initially were coming for education. And so they're coming to Rice, Med Center, doing their graduate degrees, their postdocs, whatever. And then eventually they move out to the suburbs. And then you have these growing Chinese immigrant communities in these various suburbs. Like I said, Clear Lake earlier, right? Sugar Land for sure. And then they were just commuting in, and HEC is located right there on the Loop, which is a great location as a commuter church. But eventually, as the church was growing, it was really a necessity eventually, as they start thinking, look, we're so limited with this campus. And now we see a growing community in these other areas. We have a fellowship already meeting over there. That was the impetus to start thinking, let's plant a church, taking the same kind of model, the same kind of ethos, and then planting it over there where you have a growing immigrant community. And so, yeah, that was kind of the thought process. It kind of waited until you got to a certain size that we were kind of bursting at the seams on the main campus. And then it was like, all right, time to start thinking about where's the best place to plant another church. So that's typically the reason why we plant. I think one thing we're thinking about right now is not just to do it more reactionary, like waiting till you get to that point where like, oh, we just need to like, but actually seeing it as part of the growth strategy, because, there are some churches that their growth strategy is they want to become a bigger institution, growing their congregations, growing their campuses, their buildings, maybe doing multi-site, whatever, where the institution itself gets bigger and bigger. I think for us, a lot of the leaders are more committed to staying still pretty lean institutionally. And instead of becoming like our goal is to become a mega church or to be a multi-site church. Well, why don't we just raise up new leaders and empower them to start new churches? And instead of them still being dependent upon us for either money or for the preacher to, video him in, why don't we just empower them and train them up and really see church planting as a growth strategy? Because I think if you do it well, it actually invigorates the planting church, because it means that everyone that is a leader is always thinking about reproducing himself or herself into another leader that might be a part of a future church plant.
Right.
So that, and then, that's where you are basically, you're trying to grow, to grow the church by sending. And actually, so it is a different, it requires the philosophy of, I am not so much concerned with this institution and wanting to grow this. I'm more thinking about the bigger, what as Christians would call the kingdom, the kingdom of God, that entails all the churches, either in Houston or around the world, that are still faithful to proclaiming the King's gospel, the King's message. I would rather have that kingdom mindset of like, you know what, I'd rather plant more churches and see more churches out there versus just having my church get bigger and bigger. So that's the belief that I think we are more effective if we're leaner, and then planting out as a way, instead of getting bigger and bigger institutionally, you're just sending out people. And I think the process of sending them out invigorates even the people that stay as well. And it really causes them to, hey, you need to step up because we've already sent out some strong leaders. You need to step up now as well. So I think it helps overall. But anyways, I think that's probably in my opinion, the better motivation to church plant. And I would hope that will be the motivation driving the next church plant that we do after we finish up Pearland.
Yeah, awesome. And so with the growth of like Chinese Americans, and not just Chinese Americans, but like Asian Americans in Houston, do you think there are enough churches to kind of respond to that segment of
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say I wish there were more, and that's kind of, you're hitting it right, that that's actually what I would love. And again, this is just dreaming right now. I would love for our next church plant to not necessarily have to be a traditional Chinese church with its like immigrant Chinese speaking ministry, but to plan out like an Asian American. Well, it's going to, obviously coming from us, it's going to be a large percentage of Asian American leaders.
right?
So again, like I said earlier, giving them a real chance to step up and to exercise that kind of leadership and gifting, but with a mind to reaching the community regardless of its particular ethnic group. So not necessarily like identifying it as an Asian American church, but just an English speaking, Bible preaching, gospel teaching, Jesus loving, community minded church that happens to be a number of Asian Americans, and I would love that to be our next thing, because I think we do need more of that. I think we do need more churches, either more Chinese churches that have a vibrant immigrant first generation ministry. I think that's always important, but also more importantly for the future, I think more minority led churches, in this case, Asian American minority led churches. I think that's going to be important, because even though I hope they don't just cater to Asian Americans, but there's something, like I said earlier, just about the challenges of having those opportunities
Right.
within the existing kind of majority culture church kind of system, or what do you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
So I think it'll be healthy for a church like ours to be part of the process of planting out healthy Asian American minority led churches. Yeah. And so I would love to be a part of that, not as necessarily myself doing that. I would love to be the guy, calling for that and raising up guys. And so, yeah, I mean, even in our church, I have my eye on someone that I'm hoping that he'll be a church planter one day,
Thank you.
and I hope he will lead out a core group from our English congregation to start a very church like that. And I would love to send him out with the best, and our best people, our most committed givers and servants. And I hope that church plant really thrives. And then, can trust the Lord that the English congregation here will continue to to revive itself, and then hopefully do it again, maybe down the road. I think that'd be cool, to really see that as an intentional way of growing a church, is by planting out churches.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. And how did we come about with like partnering up with, for example, Chinese Baptist Church?
I think relationally, I think it would probably be Fred relationally with the pastors there, and then it would be camp would be of that actual like, what's something we do together. Yeah. So a lot of that was, so even like you were asking me about PACT, the partnership of Asian American churches in Texas, that's all relationally. That's just Fred, who would be the great guy to ask about that, because he helped start it.
Okay.
And that was with other Chinese churches in Dallas, Austin, Houston, and in San Antonio. And I think the hub was UT Austin.
Okay.
So for many years, UT Austin and that Chinese Bible study I was telling you about, which now is AACM, that was kind of like the fellowship, the school that many of our youth went to, and that was the fellowship that all the youth from all these various Chinese churches, they all kind of met there. And so out of that fellowship, which was student run, the English pastors played a role in supplying speaking. So they would actually, like Fred used to drive all the way up occasionally to Austin to
Mm-hmm.
just speak in their large group and then drive back home, you know?
Wow.
And of
Mm-hmm.
course, Austin Chinese Church played a bigger role because they're local.
Right.
Um, but PACT came out of that kind of relationship with those
Right.
English pastors among those Chinese churches through the connection of UT students. And now it's not just focused on UT anymore. Now it's
Mm-hmm.
more of relationships between us. And we put on a few occasional retreats
Mm-hmm.
throughout the year, kind of catering to different groups. And that's kind of what keeps our relationship going. But PACT is really the friendship and the camaraderie between these
Mm-hmm.
English pastors.
Wow.
And so we fellowship. You know, we meet on a every other month basis.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I said, we have occasional retreats that we do. I can tell you more about that if you're interested. But yeah, that's the other significant partnership that we would be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
That's beyond just Houston.
Right. Yeah. And so are there any partnerships with like churches outside of Texas? Maybe like New York, I think. I don't know.
No, nothing that our church is officially a part of.
That's
I'm part of something that's kind of burgeoning and at a more infancy stage
mm-hmm,
of it's like PACT,
mm-hmm.
but think on a North American scale.
Uh-huh.
So we're
Okay.
actually trying to even bring in some of our English pastors in Canada
Okay.
as well, because as long as they're English speaking,
Right.
and then and it's a Chinese immigrant church, we all have the same dynamics. We're
Mm-hmm.
the English speaking pastors of the second generation immigrant
Mm-hmm. Right.
the second generation congregation in an immigrant church. And there's also a guy from England, a guy from Ireland, and a guy from Sweden,
Wow.
because they're also over there, the same
Mm-hmm.
thing. They're in an immigrant Chinese church where they
Okay.
have, you know, the English side is, well, I guess on the Swedish one, I guess there's maybe not the English, it's the
Mm-hmm.
Swedish side, but they all know English for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I'm part of we're calling ourselves a collaborative. Um, it's still pretty on its infancy stage, so we're not really like public yet.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of still forming identity and clarity of mission, but that's something that I hope will be a blessing to English ministries and English pastors
Mm-hmm.
and English members of Chinese heritage churches across, you know,
Mm-hmm.
North America, hopefully.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something that I hope, you know, HCC can be officially a part of that once it becomes an actual thing that we can
Yeah.
actually be a part of. But
Right.
right now it's just like me personally, and I'm keeping the leadership all informed about this, and they're supportive of it, but it's not solidified yet to really be called something that we're partnered with yet.
Right.
But
Mm-hmm.
that would be a likely thing to get involved with.
Interesting.
But that's more of an English side kind of a thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so kind of going towards PACT. So can you explain a little bit about like what does it stand for? Why was it founded?
Yeah.
When was it founded?
So Partnership of Chinese American Churches in Texas. Now, the original name was Chinese Ministries of Texas.
Okay.
So it was, you know, like I said before, just founded by the English pastors of Chinese churches in
Mm-hmm.
Houston, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, they switched the name to Partnership of Asian American Churches in Texas because one of our churches was Asian American Baptist Church in Dallas.
Uh-huh.
And so I wasn't a part of that at the time, but I think that might have been one impetus to like, okay, they don't call themselves a Chinese church, but they're still very much involved. And at the same time, maybe there is opportunity down the road to start branching out to like Korean churches and some Filipino churches and some other, you know, Southeast Asian churches, right? We haven't really done that yet, and that's something on my heart that I would really want us to start
Mm-hmm.
doing more of, because I feel like all us Asian churches, we're kind of like in our own little worlds, right? We don't
Yeah.
really interact as much. But yeah, so the whole goal was so that we could find fellowship, first of all, as the pastors,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
we all
Right.
can commiserate with each other. We all know what each other's going through.
Mm-hmm.
We can be able to resource each other and then put on activities and retreats that would be harder for us to do alone. But jointly together, we might be able to put on, we used to put on a retreat for college students.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that anymore. We've kind of outsourced that to like university to do
Right.
that.
Mm-hmm.
we still do like a young professionals retreat.
Mm-hmm.
We do a retreat for those who are considering going into pastoral ministry, especially within
I see.
In the Asian American context. We have a whole retreat for those considering ministry, either as a pastor or as a missionary. We have another one for missionaries.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then we also a part of, you probably remember CMT, China, oh no, not CMT, CMC,
Mm-hmm.
Chinese
Yeah.
Missions Convention, the one that
Mm-hmm.
happened in the downtown area. So
Right.
that's a bigger organization called Ambassadors for Christ. They
Okay.
come around every so often putting on this big convention, and they need Chinese churches to help execute it.
Mm-hmm.
And so PACT is we committed to helping execute the English side of CMC,
I
the
see.
English programming. So
Okay.
PACT helps out with that. So right now, those are the main things we're doing. I'm trying this year because I'm helping out, providing some leadership for this year. One thing I'm trying to do is have more of an online presence, and
Mm-hmm.
so we recorded a bunch of Zoom calls, and we've
Mm-hmm.
already released one of them. If you check our website or
Right.
check our Facebook page, and then we're going to start releasing more of just like brief conversations between PAC pastors, kind of talking about relevant issues that
Mm-hmm.
we typically talk about whenever we hang out together.
Mm-hmm.
And now we just want to kind of open that conversation up to our own congregations, and for them to also see that, hey, your English pastor is good friends with the English pastor over in Dallas,
Yeah. Yeah.
or the guy over in Austin. And if you're a college student and you go off to, Dallas, to UTD, and you're from Houston, you're like, hey, so where should I go to church?
Right.
Hey,
Mm-hmm.
I got some, good Chinese churches. I'm friends with these pastors. You should check them out at least. So that, I think, really, hopefully lets our church members know that their English pastor is connected with all these other English pastors here in
Mm-hmm.
Texas. I think PACT is, the more I get around to Chinese churches around the States, I think PAC is very unique. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think there's too many of these kinds of existing networks
Yeah.
among independent churches that have no denominational connection with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, just through good relationships, we've been able to forge
Mm-hmm.
this kind of thing. So my East Coast English pastor friends are like, man, we wish we had something like that. Like sometimes they
Mm-hmm.
feel very isolated.
Right.
But
Mm-hmm.
I have a network of pastors that I meet up with, on a regular basis, and we pray for each other. Sometimes if the Houston guys, I'll hang out with them. We'll
Mm-hmm.
grab lunch together. So like I just really appreciate that kind of camaraderie that comes out of that partnership.
Yeah, definitely. And what is like, what are some future aspirations of PACT or short-term
Yeah,
aspirations?
more online presence,
Mm.
providing more content on our social media, and then to also convert that into a podcast.
Okay.
I really like what Justin is doing over at CBC. I've
Oh,
been
yeah.
watching this collab. He's actually going to interview me tomorrow night. So I'm like
Cool.
doing 2 interviews this week. So yeah, I really appreciate what he's doing. I was like, that's great. And that's kind of what I'm hoping that we can also do. He's doing it among the English, the youth guys, right? Here in the Houston area. I'm
Yeah.
hoping to something like that for English pastors, not just Houston, but also in the other major cities here in Texas.
Yeah.
So I think that would be good. And then there might be some more retreat type of things that we can do. One thing we used to do well that I think we should get back to doing is providing more dialogue between Chinese and English side leaders. So
I see.
I think at HCC, WHCC, Fort Bend, we have a pretty good English Chinese, overall health.
Right.
Pretty solid. I think there's a lot of unhealthiness and a lot of tension among English and Chinese sides and a lot of smaller Chinese churches across Texas and also just across the nation. English congregation, English leaders feeling burnout, feeling just like the junior congregation, feeling very overlooked. And I think if we could be able to provide more help to building up good relationships between, showing good examples, and then also helping, like even providing some of that kind of helping like Chinese leaders, like a Chinese side pastor who doesn't really have a good relationship with his English side leadership, being able to learn from other Chinese pastors in our churches
Right.
that have experience. Hey, this is how you can really thrive well with your English side leaders.
Yeah.
You've got to learn some of these, like, hey, look, you have to realize they think differently than you, all that kind of stuff. Like
Yeah.
those type of lessons that I think our churches have gone through, we've learned either through good times and bad times. We've learned things through, through trial and error, just through experience. And I feel like we can be able to provide that for other Chinese churches that might be going through some of those challenges and struggles. I think that'd be pretty cool. So again, overall, the goal is just to provide health and encouragement, and just good resourcing for other Chinese churches.
Right. Yeah. And how far do you wish to expand, if any?
I think, I mean, for PACT, I'm just good with Texas,
Okay.
and it really is limited because it's based on where there are Chinese churches,
Right.
and they're only going to be found either in those 4 major cities,
Right. Exactly.
or in College Station, Lubbock, Waco, close to Baylor, all the major college towns, right?
Yeah.
And so if anything, I would like us to try to still connect with some of those smaller Chinese churches there that I don't think have, to my knowledge, much of an English congregation.
I see.
I think it would be great to provide some help there. And man, it would be so cool if one day we can, so at HCC, create more of a pastoral internship program, like a more robust internship program, where like anyone who's like going to that retreat that's interested in becoming an English pastor one day, or a youth pastor, like put them through an internship program at HCC, and then hopefully, like, let's say, I don't know, the College Station Chinese, there's a church, Chinese church in College Station. I don't know much about it at all. I don't even know if they have much of an English congregation. But if we could be able to connect, connect them to these smaller Chinese churches, guys who are like up and coming, wanting to serve in the Chinese church, and then kind of networking. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
If we could be able to help build up the English congregations of some of these smaller Chinese churches in Texas. So that would be for PACT. And then the other one is more of a North American, maybe even kind of English speaking European kind of, maybe a United Kingdom. I mean, but I'm not really leading. I'm just kind of, I mean, I'm helping out with their steering committee, but there's some other leaders that are kind of doing more envisioning and stuff, and they have more connections than I do.
Yeah.
I'm more of a local Texas guy. Yeah. I have a lot of Texas connections, but outside of that, I'm still more limited in who I know in terms of being able to provide leadership for stuff like that. So Texas, I think I'm good. I think I know all the English pastors, at least in the larger Chinese churches here in our state.
Yeah. I definitely think PACT is super interesting. I actually didn't know about it until like a few weeks ago when Henry sent it over. Yeah.
And that's why I feel like it's so sad that most of and then you're not the only one, most of our people in most of our churches don't know what it is.
Right.
And that's why I want us to have more of an online presence, because I think that will help people realize, oh, this is cool. I didn't realize my church was a part of that. That's awesome, so
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And I guess some concluding questions.
Sure.
What has been like your proudest accomplishment in your life?
Oh, in my life? Or just in life? Oh.
Or you can shorten the time span.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, the most significant obviously is my conversion, and so I'm coming at this as a Christian, that has completely transformed my direction in life, my values, my commitments. And then it would be my marriage. So it'd be my conversion, my marriage, being the most formative and shaping things for me. And then being a father. I think that was the other huge one. So I think all of those more personal, relational things are going to be like my biggest accomplishments. I think that's what I'm going to be. I hope to be the longer legacy. I do hope, Lord willing, God will have me here at HCC for a long time, and I can be able to help bring about some of those ideas, that I was sharing about down the road. But even if that doesn't happen, I already feel accomplished in terms of
Right.
I know what my life is meant to be about
Hmm.
because of my faith. I
Hmm.
know I know where I'm going, not just in this life, but even the next life, and I know who I get to share that with. My family,
Right.
my
Hmm. Yeah.
family, and also my church family too. And so I think that that's where, yeah, those things for me are enough. I'm contented with that. So yeah, I guess, not too exciting of an answer, but but I think that
Right.
for me that it's definitely the most meaningful
Mhm.
things
Awesome.
that I've experienced and accomplished.
Yeah. And so, what advice would you give to, especially those Asian American Christians living through this pandemic right now, especially given that like the sense of community with among Asian Americans is very important to like our
Yeah.
faith.
Yeah, and I think that's where, we are probably because even in the families we're in, and the just more cautious and conservative about health and
Hmm.
staying safe. And
Yeah.
so I think that's where we tend to also be more abiding by, like, hey, let's stay at home and let's not do as much, in-person stuff. And so yeah, we definitely do feel a loss of that kind of community,
Mhm.
especially, virtual it's better than nothing, but
Right.
I mean, it doesn't compare to really being in
Mhm.
person with each other, spending that kind of quality time. So I would just be encouraging them, to, and this is specifically you talking about Christian,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, is really realizing that, there is the physical health that we need to be
Mhm.
concerned with. And I think we are doing that, at least at HCC. We are very concerned about protecting physical health, not
Right.
being, not contributing to community spread. And I think that's important. But we also need to understand that prolonged separation is causing a decline in spiritual health. And so we can't overlook spiritual health. And now we need to think of creative ways to try to maintain both, priorities,
Hmm.
so that we're still staying safe and we're not taking unnecessary risks. But I don't think it's healthy in the long term, especially right now. We've been separated from church for over 6 months. And I would encourage that we start thinking of creative ways to be able to physically gather,
Yeah.
but in a safe way. And it's probably going to involve outdoors. It's
Hmm.
probably, and now, good thing the weather hopefully is turning and getting
Yep.
better. So whether it's for you college students or even it's for church members, I think we need to start looking into ways to still provide online options,
Hmm.
but to make a greater effort to come up with some alternative ways of gathering. Because I think 6 months of being separated and doing everything virtual is having a negative effect. I've heard from people, even today in staff meeting, the Chinese side pastor was expressing some concern that he was hearing from members who are experiencing signs of depression,
Hmm.
just loneliness,
Right.
especially some of the older members,
Hmm.
especially the ones that are seniors, or they're older singles.
Hmm.
They're not experiencing the pandemic with family; they're by themselves,
Hmm.
having a very difficult time right now because it's gone on much longer than anyone expected. So
Hmm.
yeah, I would just advise that physical health is important, spiritual health equally important. And right now, what we're doing is good for physical health, but it's harming our spiritual health. So we got
Right.
to find out some way to address
Hmm.
the prolonged separation. And I'm not at all saying like, oh, we just need to go back into our buildings and ignore all the, no. I'm equally cautious,
Hmm.
but
Right.
I do think we need to come up with maybe some ideas. So I was even talking today in staff. Um, what about a drive-in service?
Hmm.
I've heard some churches doing that. If you're willing to do drive-through at Chick-fil-A, if you're willing to do that, then what's the difference than a
Right.
drive-in service at church, parking lot? So I think we need to start thinking on that level instead
Hmm.
of just waiting for things to improve, because we've been waiting for 6 months. It
Right.
really hasn't improved that much.
Yeah.
I'm kind of tired of just sitting back and waiting.
Mhm.
I want to come up with something safe, but something different.
Mhm.
And so I would encourage even any Christian at whatever level of influence they have, even on the cell group level.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you should still probably do your meetings on Zoom because you have students not even in Houston right now, right?
Right.
But the ones that are in Houston, maybe there's a chance to do something in a park,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
just do a drive up next to each other, or
Yeah.
go to a drive-in movie theater
Uh-huh.
together, or
Uh-huh.
something like that. Just something different than
Mhm.
just everything on Zoom, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah, I'm gonna try to do that for myself, even for my
Mhm.
own community group, um, and hopefully even for our church, we can
Mhm.
be able to maybe do something outdoors, or
Mhm.
drive in or something like that. So
Right. Yeah, that'd be great. Um,
yeah,
yeah. That's all the questions I have. Is there anything else
cool.
that like you want to add or anything?
No,
Okay.
I'm good. I'm good.
Awesome.
Yeah. Helen, I just really appreciate this because this gives us a chance to talk
Yeah.
and for you get to know me a little better. So I'm
Mhm.
really glad that it was you interviewing me, even though, I wouldn't mind meeting someone else, but I'm just
Right.
so much happier that it's you. So
Yeah.
you get to know me as your pastor
Mhm.
better. So you probably know me now better than most of the college students in terms of, my
Yeah.
story. So I think that's great.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.